Hello to all finding themselves here. My name is Yanissa Amadis and I will be presenting my solo piece, Raga Music by John Mayer for the spring semester of 2021. Before playing the movements selected, I will introduce the composer and a bit of background to Indian classical music to help guide you through this piece. On to John Mayer. Not to be confused with John Mayer the guitarist, this John Mayer was an Indian composer born in India in 1929 and also a violinist who grew to essentially create the subgenre of Indo-jazz, which we'll speak about later. Mayer studied classical music starting from the age of 7, where he worked with Philippe Sandre at the Calcutta School of Music shown here. As his musicianship progressed, he also wanted to learn aspects of Hindustani classical music, which is just another term for Indian classical music. Thus, he studied with Sanatan Mukherjee, who taught him the theory behind it. Later in 1952, Mayer won a scholarship to the Royal Academy of Music in London, along with a spot as a violinist in the London Philharmonic Orchestra, the LPO. However, this organization was somewhat conservative according to sources, and they didn't feel secure with having a composer playing. Thus, they almost forced Mayer to quit, but then he later got a job at the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. As for his composing, Mayer started with the help of Matyas Setar, who was the first person to really encourage him to blend Indian and Western musical techniques. Sadly, in 2004, Mayer died in a tragic car accident at the age of 74. One thing that caught my eye in his own biography from his website was the mentioning of his family being close to the poverty line. Although he may not be very well known, Mayer did push himself to achieve many opportunities and any opportunity possible to really continue his musical career, which is very inspiring to some musicians like myself who may find themselves in a rut sometimes and unable to continue, but we still push because of our passion and love for music. Now we move on to Indo-jazz. What even is this new genre that Mayer created? Indo-jazz is essentially what it says. It's a mixture of Indian classical music and jazz. Mayer started an Indo-jazz group with Jamaican saxophonist Joe Harriott, pictured on the left side of the slide. Their group was signed under Atlantic Records, which was overseen by Ahmed Erdogan as president. His idea was to combine the quintets of Mayer and Harriott into one whole idea, which created the Indo-jazz genre. Mayer's quintet consisted of a sitar, a tabla, tambura, a flute, violin, and harpsichord, in which those two he played himself, while Harriott's quintet was more of a traditional jazz quintet, with instruments such as trumpet, trombone, saxophone, drum set, and bass. Thus, this created the Joe Harriott and John Mayer double quintet. And as you can see, this picture here is the front cover of one of their Indo-jazz fusion albums.
Now we move on to Raga music itself. What does Raga even mean? Roughly, it translates to color or passion in Sanskrit, according to Oxford Languages. A raga can also be defined as a pattern of notes that have certain intervals and rhythms and other characteristics that serve as like a lead sheet. You're given chords, notes, maybe even a mode, and you improvise based off of what you're given. During my research of the solo, I also realized how similarly complex Indian music theory is to Western music theory. They have essentially their own scales, which in Sanskrit are called that, and they have 9 versions, kind of like we have different modes. And you can see the different types of scales that they have. And you may notice that they may coincide with some of the modes that we use in our Western music theory. However, they're not just major and minor scales, they are essentially modes that are used in Hindustani classical music, although they may coincide with certain major or minor scales. What's interesting about them as well is that they are used depending on the time of day, like morning, nighttime, or evening, or even season, which will make the titles of each movement make a bit more sense. I've also went ahead and translated the titles as best as I could to further implicate the meanings behind the movements. As we come to a close before the presentation, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen to my research. Hopefully this sparked your interest in Hindustani music, because performing the solo certainly sparked mine.